Jack.
Levi.
The Book Club from Hell.
Hello everyone, this is Jack with the Book Club from Hell, a self-aware media project extruded from the body of the Art of Darkness podcast. This is a special episode. We were joined by Brad Kelly and Kevin Kautzman from the Art of Darkness podcast to talk about Don DeLillo's novel Point Omega. The first half of this episode is mostly about the Art of Darkness podcast, as well as Brad and Kevin's various projects. The second half is about Point Omega, written by American novelist Don DeLillo and published in 2010. It's a mysterious novel, characteristic of DeLillo's post-underworld work. If you like what we're doing with this podcast and want to support us, we have a Patreon account, the link to which is in the show notes. We release bonus episodes on Patreon and have weekly chats with subscribers about our most recent episodes. I've also published a novel called Tower, if you're interested in hearing more from me. And finally, we have a Discord server for this podcast, on which you can find Levi, me, and plenty of other degenerates who listen to the Book Club from Hell, the link to which is, once more, in the show notes. Even more importantly, I'd encourage anyone listening to check out the Art of Darkness podcast. It's a fantastic project, and one which I highly, highly recommend. So, if you want to hear our interpretation of a novel which defies any single interpretation, then listen on. Enjoy. Yeah, once again, thanks very much for coming on. We both really appreciate it. It's cool to be able to get some people on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks for reaching out. We really appreciate it, man. We like to, one thing we do in our show, we have like set topics like a year in advance. And
really?
We get to mix that up a little bit when we have guests on, but when we get to go on other people's show, we get to talk about stuff that's, it's not that it wouldn't fit our show, but it doesn't. We haven't found a place for it in the format, so it can be. It can be pretty.
Yeah, you
cool.
guys have dialed in your format quite well. It's I think you've got a nice premise for the show, right? And yeah, for sure. It's you guys are absolutely prolific. I was checking out like not just your podcast, but just your other stuff. I was like, where do these guys fit in other parts of their life?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. For me, it's all the time that I used to spend drinking. So
yeah, nice. That'll free up quite a bit. Because you also got to factor in the hangover time as well, right?
Yeah.
No,
basically stopped drinking and got married, and it's like, well, I don't have anything else to do, really. So
I was going to say we both have we both have people in our lives who support us mightily and give us. It's a constant negotiation over space and boundaries, but we have a lot of support from friends and family.
Yeah, amen. Yeah,
that's really lovely. I think that's super important, especially when you're in those early phases of like a creatively autonomous pursuit, like with your guys doing like playwriting and novel writing. I've seen it with Jack, and sort of for me myself, like trying to move towards doing my own stuff as well. There's a lot to juggle at the beginning, isn't it? And you got to put out the content, and you got to like do all your other stuff, and it's really impressive that you guys have kept up the cadence that you have.
It takes a certain kind of person to be in a relationship with somebody who during the pandemic says, I'm starting a new podcast with my friend from grad school. We had an abortive podcast that did nothing for years, but we're going to do another one, and it's going to work out this time. Now we're going to talk about William S. Burroughs for an hour and put it out on the internet, and people are going to love it. I mean, please. And nobody believes you are doing anything until wait a minute. Oh, this is a real thing. So,
right. Yeah. And so you had another podcast, did you? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
The podcast Down by the Docks. We don't talk about it. It was literally like a vibe cast that we were talking about drinking and all the rest. We would just get together, get hammered in grad school where we met down at Texas and record it. We had no idea what we were doing, and then I moved to New York and Brad moved around, and we sort of kept it going. But it had no format, it had no structure, and it was a goof, But however, I learned a lot about engineering, about audio, about it was like a long warm up that went nowhere. And then when we finally decided, hey, we've got an idea that's going to have a format, which is Art of Darkness, a podcast about the dark side of creativity at artofdarkpod.com, where we do biographical profiles of dead artists. Once we had that franchise, that concept, all of the sort of the hitherto wasted time was not wasted.
Yeah, no,
and there's
we
a
came in
lesson
hot
in
on
that.
the first episode. We knew how to talk generally. Like, you know, there's all kinds of subtleties to doing this that they're not even difficult to master necessarily, but they're not obvious, perhaps, if you first get into it.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think it coalesces so well with the rest of your creative work, like the Art of Darkness stuff. Yeah, it adds nicely to the things that you're doing in your creative writing. So what could you both tell us a little bit about some of your other works? Maybe Kevin, we can start with you. You've just released a new novel, House of Sleep. Do you?
That's me.
That's Brad.
me.
Start with Brad.
Yeah.
Brad,
Okay,
yes,
yeah.
Brad. Sorry.
No,
it's okay.
6 a.m.
Yeah, listen. We come as at this point now. We come as a package deal. I'm Pulp, and he's Slick, and he's the novelist, and he's the more introverted one, and I'm the playwright, and I've dragged him into show business. And Brad, tell people about your novel, and it's not new. It's been out for a while.
Yeah,
He's got a new one coming.
Yeah. House of Sleep has been out for a little while. It's sort of in the Don DeLillo vein in a way. Don DeLillo's novel Point Omega is described as a metaphysical anti-thriller by some reviewers. House of Sleep is sort of, you know, on the basic level, it's kind of a psychological thriller. It's delving into sort of speculative realms. It's got, you know, a sort of a retreat center or something along those lines, though there's nefarious things at work under the surface. Pulls together these people who they're learning how to remember their dreams as if they happened yesterday, and unwittingly being sort of drawn into a cult, and all sorts of dark and hopefully entertaining things happen along the way. People seem to like it. It's done pretty well for, you know, something that I put out myself, and it's still available out there. You can listen to the first third of it for free in audio on my website, bradkellyesque.com. And I'm about to finish another novel this summer. I don't know when that'll be out, because there's a whole process after you quote unquote finish to sort of try to navigate. But hopefully, you know, early next year that will be available. That'll be called That Which Is Within. Totally different work. It's set primarily in the sewers of Detroit, and sort of a cosmic, subterranean cosmic horror sort of thing. So definitely look out for that. There's excerpts available, or an excerpt available from that in the great literary journal Apocalypse Confidential. Our homies over there were gracious enough to publish that last summer, I believe. So that's kind of what I got going on that front.
Amazing. I've got so many follow-up questions, but I'll quickly go over to Kevin. You've also got some creative works that you've put out, some plays. I've got here, I found Moderation and the Animals. Could you tell us a bit about those works? And
Absolutely. So I am a playwright, and I run a theater company with some very good friends, and we're at badmouththeatercompany.com, badmouthtc.com. I was just at the Valdez Theater Conference in Valdez, Alaska, working on Moderation. The recording didn't turn out there. They had some technical problems, but that's okay, because Moderation already exists in multiple formats online. If you go to Spotify and look up Moderation Play, Moderation, Kevin Kautzman, Kautzman, you'll find it. That's a reading we did in 2020. A theater company called Spooky Action Theater did a reading of it. That play is about social media content moderators losing their minds at work. It's a dark comedy, very online. You'll see that a lot of my work is sort of about the internet and online culture. We're going to be producing Moderation here in St. Paul, Minnesota in October, so stay tuned for that. We're also going to try to put out some online stuff. That's one of our commitments at Badmouth Theater Company. We're devoted to new work and new writing, but everything we put out, we try to do something digitally, even if it's something as simple as a reading of the work online, just so people who are halfway across the world can also sort of participate. I'm a playwright first, so I love being in the room, love a fully realized play, but I also recognize that in this digital era, there's something to be said for kind of opening access and trying to create online work. So with that in mind, you can go and hear both Moderation and The Animals at badmouthtc.com. We've done a number of other readings. We've got something coming up later this summer that's we're going to do like a reading of a play by a fellow named Ross Howard, who's a very accomplished and established playwright from the UK. He came to us, and it's very fun because this new play he has calls for 4 actors, 2 of whom are American podcasters, ladies, and then there are 2 British ladies. And my co-founders at Badmouth Theater Company happen to be ladies who do a podcast through the theater company, and they're also both actors. Shout out to Amanda and Mari. And so really just obvious. So you can anticipate that. Really briefly, The Animals is the most recent play that I wrote alone, and that it was sort of a response to the unrest and the riots, here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And then also there's a bit of a crypto thing. There's a hitman in it. Sort of this mytho-poetic, strange, paranoid, anxious play about a lady veterinarian who talks to the animals, and she's losing her mind. I sort of say it's a combination of like Dr. Dolittle, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and Black Mirror. So nice. There you go. Nice. You can go hear a reading of that. And then finally, this is the last thing, and this is what I'm really promoting right now. I'm very excited about this. So friend of Art of Darkness, very good friend of mine, Abby Lucas, who is a film director. She's a Kiwi, but she's a Londoner. She's lived in London for a long time. That's where we met. We met through the theater. She was on the Bolaño episode of Art of Darkness. She's going to come back this year for Hitchcock. Very, very good friend of mine. We've written a number of screenplays together. We were asked by a theater company here in town called Shadow Horse Theater. They do a thing called Dark Pony Radio, pure radio plays, totally a natural fit for us. They're kind of a horror focus. So they said, hey, we want you to write something for us. We're like, all right, let's do it. So we have a new radio play coming out this summer. The trailer just dropped. If you go to my Twitter account, you can find it. It's at Kautzmania, Kautzmania. In any case, it's called Basilisk. Are you familiar with the Reddit meme thought experiment of Rocco's Basilisk? Are you familiar with this?
Not heard of this.
No, I'm not.
Okay. Well, Rocco's, go look it up. It's very fun. It's not a serious philosophical line of thinking, but it is sort of a pop culture folk tale type idea. And fundamentally, the idea is if an AI was to achieve consciousness, it would be incentivized to trap anybody who did not promote it and or who actively opposed it in a simulation and torture them for all eternity. So it would very strongly want to incentivize you to support it. And remember this when you're online doom scrolling, that the AI may in fact be watching you already, or it may achieve such a degree of power that it could effectively travel back into time and trap. You may already be in a simulated hell that the basilisk has created.
Well, if you're doom scrolling, you already are.
There you go. So our radio play is called Basilisk. It's in 2 parts, and it's about a whistleblower who's involved in the creation of an AI that he believes has framed him, landed him in prison, and now he's trying to figure out how to essentially escape this prison that the AI has captured.
That's fantastic. Have you read I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream?
Harlan Ellison, yeah, right.
Yeah. That's like in the same vein. It's very much like. It reminds me a lot of that. It's a great short story. I'd 100% recommend reading it. And it's really weird. It's definitely one of the strangest like sci-fi short stories. Yeah, that's amazing. And you mentioned already the podcast. So you're extremely tight with your with your elevator pitch for the podcast. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the podcast.
Brad, yeah, sure, yeah. I'll I'll take that on a little bit. So, the basic premise is Art of Darkness is the name of it. We're sort of exploring the dark side of creativity. In some ways, that's kind of an opening gambit to learn more about, these great figures, people like, William S. Burroughs, we mentioned. We're right now, Kevin and I are working on something a little unique for our sort of archive. We're doing an episode on William Shakespeare, and then one on the leading candidate for who may have really been William Shakespeare, for people who are familiar with the Shakespeare authorship question. So Kevin's going to do a sort of orthodox-ish biography of William Shakespeare, and I'm doing one on Edward de Vere shortly thereafter. But it's not just writers. We do other people too. We did a John Lennon episode earlier this year. Way back when we did like a Johnny Cash episode. But primarily writers, since we're both writers. But we've also done people of the theater like Sarah Kane. We had a great episode on Stanley Kubrick years ago. And then sort of to supplement this, we've done 60 some figures at this point. And to supplement this, we bring on people for what we call darkroom episodes. So those core episodes on artists are hours long, 4 to 5 hours long.
4 hours long.
They're the whole story. I mean, our goal is, if you're interested in this figure, this is the easiest access point to get as much information about these people as possible, and hopefully in entertaining fashion. And then we bring on, for supplemental discussions, we bring on guests who maybe have something interesting to say about this subject. Just yesterday, we recorded an episode focused largely on the pulp fiction movement, largely in America, with H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, and a bit of a focus on an Englishman named M.R. James, who sort of innovated in the ghost story genre. And we bring on kind of to flesh out more our knowledge and our audience's knowledge and understanding of these figures. And then we also have a book club for paid subscribers on Substack and Patreon at Art of Dark Pod. Soon we're talking Cormac McCarthy's final 2 novels, Stella Maris and The Passenger. So kind of a lot of moving parts, but it's all, in our opinion, it's all one project, and we're kind of along for the ride with our audience, which has been really fun as people have started to listen to it, and we start hearing what people like, and it's been really cool to try and navigate this ship. So
yeah, I think it's been it's a great premise for a podcast, and I think you guys will have an infinite amount of content to create. There's so many interesting artists and the way that their lives, the battles that they have to overcome, or whatever. And I think it's a really interesting hook. I've got a specific question about. I know I need to let Jack ask a question. I'm going to ask one more question first. Let Jack in there. I was looking through your back catalogue, and I started listening to your episode on At the Mountains of Madness on H.P. Lovecraft, which is I think a guest crossover episode.
Yeah, this is a Darkroom episode. That was actually with the Matthew Kelly from Dark Pony Radio that Kevin's working with the Basilisk Project. But yes, yep.
I absolutely love At the Mountains of Madness. I've read, as far as I'm aware, I've read most of H.P. Lovecraft stuff, and
excellent.
And man, I absolutely love that story. And when I've heard about, I think some studio was going to get the same guy who did Pan's Labyrinth. They were trying to get him or her to do At the Mountains of Madness, and for some reason, it's cursed or whatever. They've tried to get it off the ground a couple of times, and they haven't made a full length film adaptation of it yet. But when they do one day, hopefully, I can't wait for it to come out. I just think it's one of the most compelling short stories that Lovecraft created, and so I thought that was a great place for me to start personally. But maybe for our listeners, we've got a very diverse back catalogue. I don't know if you had a look at it. We've covered all sorts of weird stuff. So rather than trying to pick,
which is cool. I saw that. I was like, oh, these are kindred spirits.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever. Yeah.
Why don't you give us a couple of recommendations about episodes that would be a good first intro to your show, but maybe give us maybe one or two from radically different perspectives. So maybe like your own, and then like a sort of wild card that you reckon would be a good place to start, and who would be a good person to like listen to that episode.
Yeah, Kevin, what do you got? What do you like? What's the first one that comes to mind when you're like, hey, listen to an episode?
Oh, it's so tricky. I'm personally proud of the Dante episode.
Nice.
I got Dante pilled really hard, and I think that my passion, like I think it comes over. I learned so much, and coming off that, and I have a degree in history. Coming off that, I had never really understood, like, why, okay, you're going to be a Dante scholar. You're going to devote your entire life. And halfway through preparing the episode, I'm like, oh, my God, I want to go. I wish I could go back, learn Italian. Yeah. You know, you could just go, oh, I could see how somebody could fall down this rabbit hole. So I really love doing that. And then I would throw one in back at Brad, because the franchise, the format of the show is that I prepare an episode and Brad gets to be Crow T Robot and what, you know, and comment, right, from Mystery Science Theater 3000, right? He gets to ride shotgun and provide color commentary. Then he prepares an episode, and I get to be Tom Servo, you know, and I get to live out my little Mystery Science Theater jam where I get to make comments and look for the laugh. And one thing we say about the show is we laugh so we don't cry, because there's always it always ends the same way, because we only do dead artists, right? So they have to be dead for a year and a day before we'll cover them. So in any event, I would say his Bosch episode was a real breakthrough for us because of what he said earlier, where there's not a lot of biography. So he had to find an angle. He had to find a way in, and I was personally very proud of him for the way he did it. And I really enjoyed it. Brad, what about you? What are some that popped to mind?
Yeah, so thinking recently, more or less, we've been doing the show for coming on 4 years, and there's a lot of episodes. I think one that jumps out to me that I really enjoy. I'll give you two, kind of in rapid succession. Andrei Tarkovsky, Russian filmmaker behind Stalker and Nostalgia and Andrei Rublev. Just a fascinating story, an example of like an artist too that I was familiar with. I'd seen a couple of those films, and I got to just like live in Tarkovsky's cinematic syntax and his life and all of that for a month, and it was kind of revelatory to me. And I think that episode, and one thing I liked about that is Tarkovsky is one of these figures who I think people who aren't total cinephiles will kind of dismiss as being like pretentious, like you're into these like slow art movies, like who cares, and really trying to get to the nucleus of like, why is he worth watching these films, what was he doing, and how does life relate to that. And another one, Emily Dickinson, who, another person, great American poet. I had read a few of her poems and was, vaguely familiar with her. And then just, through the research, kind of realizing like, oh, this was like some kind of strange prophet. Like she's so much more than I had realized what she was. And such a fascinating story of her reclusion and all of these things. Just a sort of bizarre, eccentric genius. Kevin's got, thinking about the Kevin episodes that I like the most, because I think this is fun. One that people might enjoy is a Charles Bukowski episode. We had our friend, the poet Jason Gallagher, come on for that and help out with that one. But just, a lot of people, I don't know what it's like internationally, but a lot of men in the United States have a Charles Bukowski phase. And what you sometimes not realize, I think from the outside, if you're not really in tune with what Charles Bukowski was all about, it can be he can be easy to dismiss in a certain way because he made his greatest works look so easy in a sense. They're not at all. Try to actually write a Charles Bukowski poem and fall on your face. But getting underneath that whole psyche was fascinating to me, and I it kind of realize the enormous talent that guy was.
Absolutely.
And the very unique character that he was, like truly a true original at the same time. So,
Absolutely. Bukowski's, I had my little Bukowski phase, and there's just something about he just so poignantly captured this sense of, and I don't know how much this applies, but if it applies to other young men, there was a period in my life in my 20s where just some of the stuff that he was talking about, sure, the maybe explicit parts of the experience, obviously didn't live his life or whatever, but the underlying emotional sense, obviously I would imagine that Bluebird would be his most famous one, and that was what got hooked me, and I was hey, this that's exactly how I felt at that time in my life, and I knew he's putting words on this in a way that very few other men that I've seen in poetry have been able to capture this, and amazing. I can't wait to listen to that episode, so thanks.
Yeah, check it out. Yeah.
Bluebird is a banger. It's a banger, and you can, you as an artist, if you get 5 of those, congrats. If you get one, congrats.
Yeah, congrats. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Fantastic. Well, Jack, you must have a few questions up your sleeve. By the way, Jack's working on such an interesting book that I think is has a lot of parallels with moderation. It's Jack. Do you want to quickly mention your?
No, what I'm working on at the moment, I want to keep under wraps.
Oh, damn. It's top secret. My bad.
No, it's not top secret. It's just
top secrets in here.
it's still coalescing into something coherent.
You do have to be careful.
We like moderation. We like the sound of moderation.
You got to check out moderation. And I'm looking at your back catalog, and I see you have an episode devoted to the Killdozer.
Damn, I should the episode.
I should say that Abby and I are in the middle of working on a Killdozer musical called Killdozer the Musical. And we've got about 25 pages. I'm really excited, so stay tuned for that. We actually put that aside to work on Basilisk, but I know people are really excited about it. Really, whenever I post about it, because that is the musical that the American theater needs. I will say that right now. If we ever win a Tony Award, I will melt it down and solder it into my Killdozer that I'll make with the proceeds from.
Nice.
I know, but I love the Killdozer story. People, what a wonderful thing, and it's our day. June 6th is it's a day for us. It's a day for the bros. Killdozer Day,
and it's just you could imagine making
a problem.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
You can imagine making such an interestingly dark but humorous exploration of that story. Even I don't know the huge amount of the detail that you guys might, how much of the detail you guys might know, but he sort of was covering up the Killdozer in his was it in his
work shed? His shed.
Work shed. I can just imagine you just pulling over a dodgy tarp or something. It's clearly a Killdozer under there. But it's there's nothing to see here. Whatever. I'm sure you've got a lot of ideas.
Yeah. Killdozer Day is June 4th. June 4th. I'm mortified I got it wrong. No, and the fun thing about it too is that Ronald Reagan died the day after Marvin Heemeyer died. So in our musical,
the last thing he saw.
Marv wakes up in purgatory and he's trying to figure out what the hell happened because he doesn't have any memory. Because in our world, if you suicide, your memories are all scattered. And so Ronald Reagan shows up in purgatory with his squadron of angels who are the Secret Service angels.
Yeah.
And the whole conceit of the story is that Marv has to remember what happened in order to prepare himself to go and meet the man through the door. Because you got to have your story straight before you go and meet the man, and the man likes a song and dance number. So you got to get ready for God, basically. So he goes back in time with Ronald Reagan's magic jelly beans to remember why he made the Killdozer, and that is Killdozer. And there's a B story, there's a love story back in Granby. And anyway, stay tuned for that. We are seriously going to work on it for the next. Yeah, I love it. Nice. Good stuff.
it is astonishing that through the power of the media and then eventually the internet, you can have figures like, was it Marvin Heemeyer, who can do something so deranged. It's something which resonates so strongly with probably a part of the masculine spirit that he can achieve this degree of infamy and eventually heroism throughout. He's a folk
hero. He's like a contemporary Paul Bunyan. Any American, anybody living in the world today who hasn't had a fantasia of doing something like this, you're not paying attention. I'm not saying you should go out and actually do it. Right? He could have hurt people, and he did a lot of property damage. But hey, they had insurance. This spirit. This is like a fundamentally American spirit that the dude had. I mean, God came to him in a hot tub and told him to make a tank. What could be more
that is
American?
Pretty American. That's right
with
up
the
there.
property damage, I'm just led to think of breaking eggs to make omelettes. What the omelette actually was, I'm still trying to establish, but I can feel quite deeply in its spiritual sense that it was important.
And maybe it's just the freedom to be able to,
just a man who'd had enough.
Listen.
Enough.
Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things. That's what he said.
Yeah.
I'm a reasonable man.
Yeah. It's a whole
Keep
thing.
pushing. Keep pushing.
Because it wasn't just a man that snapped, because it took a long time to construct the killdozer. So this was a consistent, concerted effort to make the apex predator on and off the road.
This is part of the masculine dream too, though, that you might go out into your garage and build with your hands something that can change the world. Right? Like, I mean, like a kind of a, it is kind of funny when it actually comes. But, right. Like, there's something there.
I am from North Dakota, and Marvin Heemeyer was from South Dakota. And I took when I saw his picture, I said, I fucking know this guy. I grew up with this guy. This guy is like my stepdad's generation. I know these people, and I know that he went to Colorado, was kind of probably a little bit socially out of his depth, got on the wrong side with his neighbors, and this is a guy that you push the wrong dude too far. And when anyway, so I feel like I have a special insight into Marvin Heemeyer's psychology, having grown up where and when I did.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting, actually. Like that part of as a non-American, I can sometimes there's definitely aspects of his story where I can see that, like especially lonely male from like a rural setting or something. Like it can be quite. We've got, like in Australia, one of the like highest groups of people with the highest rates of suicide are essentially like middle-aged farmers. And I grew up in like a rural part of New South Wales, and definitely had this sense of like, I kind of. It's not exactly the same, but can kind of see what are some of the things the dynamics that were going on here with like isolation and then like moving between country towns, and these towns can be so tight knit. But then you add on top of that like how like just the I don't know. There's a level of intensity to American culture. Like you guys always just do the things to the most extreme. Well, we've never had a killdozer or anything analogous to a killdozer. So it's just like
most of the rest of the Anglosphere is not PvP. We are PvP. We are. We have no we have socialism, but not but not for the middle class. So being middle class in America is pure PvP hellscape. It's like logging into Call of Duty online and they're immediately calling you names and want to see you dead. They want to headshot you. Like straight out of grad school. Take all your money. Brad's laughing because he knows it's true.
It's so interesting. I've got this fascination with American culture. Like I love it, but I also find it very good. And I'd love to move to America, like at least for a little while at some point. It's a country of extremes, but it's also this country where so much can be achieved. You guys get around each other like in a way that's really cool. Like you guys are out there like, for example, with your work, I can only assume that people are very encouraging when they find out about, like, the level of encouraging that Americans have that I don't really find elsewhere in the world. And that's really
why we don't have a killdozer.
That's really cool. But there's also, like, I've also found that there can be this in like very sort of pervasive callousness as well. Like, you don't want to be a loser in America. Like, there's not as much slack in, like, loser in that, like, whereas in Australia there's a lot, maybe not as much as encouragement, it feels like at times, but there's also more of a sense of, like, well, we don't, it doesn't feel as callous. But maybe that's just an inside-outside thing.
I think that's fair to say. I mean, I think y'all famously have the tall poppy situation, and pockets of America have that, but America is big enough. America is a whole world unto itself. So you can move, you can get away from your hometown and get away from the tall poppy thing. But in America, I mean, fundamentally in America, the highs are way higher and the lows are generally way lower. Yeah.
That's
it.
It's really interesting.
Kind of a bipolar.
It must be quite challenging in the creative arts to navigate that sort of, like, I don't know, like, what's it been like in your experience, like, navigating your career as creative writers and in theater and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, so Kevin and I met in our MFA program at the University of Texas. Go Longhorn, hook 'em horns, and and you know, it's not, it's in the MFA world, that particular program we were in is got a fair amount of shine on it, a lot of shine on it. You know, not trying to play it up, but this is part of the narrative.
Despite our association with it.
Yeah, right. We may have ruined it, but up until our time. And then kind of coming out of that, so there's kind of pretenses. You're sort of in there, and there's people a few years ahead of you that have gone on to, you know, write for Netflix and publish novels that are reviewed. And so there's a sense of, like, oh, well, this is all going to kind of work out. I'll kind of walk out of here and I'll have some kind of deal, and maybe I'll have an academic position, and et cetera. And then for me, literally none of that happened. I wrote a novel. Nobody cared. I couldn't get a job teaching English 101 at a community college. And after that, you know, some time sort of licking my wounds on that, I kind of just decided, well, I just gotta, maybe this is an American thing. I don't know. I've traveled quite a bit, but I've never lived anywhere in any other country. I kind of just came to this conclusion of, like, screw it, I'll just do everything myself.
Yeah,
like that's that. And now that I've been doing that for a while, and it's, I don't know how you define working exactly, but it seems like it's working. Now you're kind of like, well, why do I need anybody else? Now it's kind of like, well, thank God I didn't get an academic position. Thank God I'm not on a big publisher. You know, like, what does that stuff even do for you in 2024? You know, but it is challenging to navigate because you live under the illusion that things are a meritocracy of some sort. You know it's not perfect, but it's not. Everybody's it's PvP. You just got to get out there and, you know, fight for throw enough elbows that you get a little space to stand, and then just grind from there, basically.
In these industries, I think it's changing a lot. Maybe Jack can speak a little bit to this from the, like, writing perspective, but in traditional publication, in the traditional publishing industry, there's gatekeeping, and on some level, like, you understand the gatekeeping, like trying to do quality control, trying to give yourself, like, the best, but then that can come along with its own set of issues, and I definitely saw that in my friends who are in the theatre industry in Australia. Like, there's a lot of that going on, or film and television in Australia. If you want to get into those mainstream institutional, like, theatre or play settings, or film and television settings, like, you've got to do a lot of, like, social navigating as well. And whereas, like, on the internet, like, it's just straight, you've got to build up the distribution yourself, but starting from zero, if you, like, put in the time, learn the skills and stuff, you can build up that from scratch, and that's obviously the path that we're going. But sorry, Kevin.
No, not at all. And, and our situation is a little unusual, and we know identity politics has sort of had its crest. I mean, we're still sort of that wave is still riding high, and Brad and I graduated kind of at an inflection point. It was sort of like the people who came just before us were the last.
Like what
dropper out of
years?
Nam.
Sort of did you graduate?
2013.
Nice.
2013.
Yeah,
And the whole culture changed in the wake of the recession, and things got to be a lot more cutthroat.
Yeah, so we were
and then,
in
of
our
course, we had
second
the-
year of undergrad in 2013. So still.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and then you had the Great Wokening, that happened,
yeah.
and sort of, dispossessed fellows like us. I mean, at the conference that I just went to, people go, "What are you doing now? Teaching?" And I'm like, like I wouldn't even accept a position if they offered me one. I wouldn't even. I'm much, and that's a huge sea change for me, because when you come out of a program like that, especially as an American playwright, there's this sort of trajectory that you're supposed to have. You're supposed to angle to try to, God willing, you maybe win a Guggenheim. God willing, you maybe get into Juilliard. I nearly did.
Wow. Nice.
There's this whole list of programs and things that you're supposed to do. And there's a bit of Stockholm syndrome there too, where you're just like, oh God, please accept me. And now it's like, meh. You can kind of take it or leave it, and that's a good place to be. But it took me a while to get there. The big thing that hang on one second, Brad. The big thing that I would do now, if I was, and we do teach. We teach through Art of Darkness. Art of Darkness is a teaching exercise. People learn a hell of a lot from it. I come from school teachers it's in my blood. But in any case, I had a lot of coffee today. I would, and the generation who mentored us and taught us at grad school, God love them. They were boomers. They had second and third homes. They had real deal publishing deals. They were real people before history ended, right, for our generation. And so they were people of history and people of gravitas and NPR people, and they had all that. That path was completely shut for us. And what I would do if I was in a situation to teach and to mentor young artists now, in addition to simply the things that I know about the craft, which I'm very grateful for. I was taught by some incredible people over the course of the years, both in England and in the United States, in terms of playwriting. But I would teach them how to platform. Which is what we've done with Art of Darkness. And I know it's a kind of a gross word, and I don't think of myself as a brand or having a brand, but that if you're going to give somebody an MFA in the arts now, there should be like a semester devoted to career, and part of career should be how to platform online.
Absolutely.
And that's just something Brad and I navigated ourselves. So now when Brad releases his next novel, he has, it's not Rogan numbers, but we've got people who are paying attention and who care enough, So, and that's something that that generation who mentored us, they couldn't have done. We could have taught them. So
they don't have any sense,
and they have no sense of it.
It's
that's a context and circumstance thing. They didn't have any real reason to. They're not gonna have to. Right. They don't have to make sure they tweet every day.
They sort of stopped at emails for them were gee whiz, and that's where they stopped.
Right,
and again, God love them, and different generations. So anyway,
but there was an interesting carry on from that. Like sort of you talk about that Stockholm syndrome, the changeover. I, for a brief moment, was part of the editorial board of a reputable literary journal. And we put out some good stuff, but you sort of sit in that room, and it was one of the journals that I would have been trying to get into prior to that, right? And really hinging, oh my gosh, are they going to accept my stuff? And then you kind of realize, no, all these things are just some people sitting in a room. They're not necessarily any more talented or insightful or sophisticated or even visionary than anybody else sitting in any other room. They just happen to be sitting in that room. And then when you kind of realize, actually that's also true at The New Yorker and FSG and all of these things, it kind of liberates you. You sort of come to the conclusion, I honestly don't care what they think about me doing. I mean, it'd be great to get a New Yorker puff piece, obviously, but in a sense, I don't really care. It's just some guys sitting in a room. What does their opinion matter?
It's one of the most interesting times in history to be alive, and I think on the one hand, I totally see and agree with your criticisms of, I suppose, 20th century institutions and the way that they're the shifting relevance of them now, and but the flip side is I also think that there's this amazing opportunity, the fact that we're getting to sit here and talk to some people like you on the other, enabled by this technology, and we can build an audience from scratch. That's absolutely incredible in this kind of decentralization, deinstitutionalization of the creative arts, of media, of technology itself. and like especially software technology. Like it's I mean, obviously people are still figuring it out, and I feel like we're sort of in this age group, you guys, us as well. There's this kind of like probably 20-30 year transition period, whereas I've got like nieces and nephews now, like Jack's got a kid on the way. Like they won't have these transitional problems. Like to them, they're just already like my niece, she's like 10 years old or something. Like I think she's 10 or 11 years. Like she doesn't even think about it. She's got, I don't know, her audience on Instagram or what YouTube could be massive for all I know. Right. And she's really charismatic, and she knows how to use the phone, and she knows how to communicate, and like she's got all this sort of stuff going on. And like same with my other, like the nephews, maybe not social media as much, but like the video game aspects of it, and the, you know, as I say, like digital natives, and their idea of having a digital native business model and a digital native career is that's not even going to be like an issue for them. There's so much tacit knowledge in the way they've grown up, whereas like our parents' generation, you know, probably people born between like, you know, probably 50s, 60s, 70s, and all the way up to us, there's this like transition of this like, oh, actually, you don't necessarily need to go and get permission and authorization and a seal of approval from an institution in order to contribute creatively to the culture.
Yes.
And if you can figure out how to make that work, you can actually go directly to your audience now. Like you guys have done a wonderful job of that. In fact, actually, I know that we've got to get onto the book at some point, but
that's all right.
it'd also be great to hear about the classes that you guys do, because you just mentioned that, and I think that's a good example of like somebody, you know, a team online figuring out, oh, how do we make this work for us given our interests and so forth.
Yeah, we don't do formal classes,
Yeah.
although that's actually something we discussed when we were sort of like, how do we turn Art of Darkness into something that's like a moneymaker? And it could be something down the line. I mean, right now, my point when I said we teach is that these Art of Darkness core episodes are, they're hours and hours of education, really. I mean, it's edutainment, which is a disgusting portmanteau. English is a horrific language. I hate it. I wish I well, I'm gonna enough of that line of thought. But yeah, no, and then we do the book club too, and it's, you know, and it's not like we position ourselves, you know, as we don't give ourselves the mantle of expertise. I think that's one of the refreshing things about our show. It's like what Brad said, like the audience is coming along the journey with us. But every episode, like we prepare for the other guy, and we kind of we walk the other guy through the biography of the life of an artist, and we learn a lot. And
I mean, we talk about their work too. So along the way, it ends up being sort of not about the work from a craft standpoint, but also from, you know, your sort of standard English class standpoint, but also a lot of cultural context and, you know, a lot of history. You take a history course, a lot of that is framed around politics and military conflicts and that sort of stuff. And now, of course, all that's important for understanding a historical context, but like also, you know, what the hell was John Lennon up to? What was that all about?
Yeah.
You learn a lot about a society.
You learn
and
a lot about
history.
Liverpool and the UK
Right.
at the time, and all of that.
Yeah,
for sure.
So,
Dante,
so a lot of that,
mm-hmm.
right. So a lot of that gets kind of gathered up along the way, and you know, and that's revelatory for us.
It's
and
a
hopefully
good.
for
I mean,
listeners.
I would say it's a good companion piece to something like hardcore history. I mean, if you're interested in history, like this is a podcast for you. Because, and that's a good point, Brad. I don't think we've ever said that, but like, a lot of history when you take it, it's the history of war, it's the history of economy. Very rarely is it sort of the history of the arts, but the arts are like ultimately what matters most to guys like us.
Yeah, we've had that experience for sure. Like, it's always a good. It's like the person's book or creative work is like this nice portal into finding out about the history around them. I found out a lot about the Spanish Civil War through reading Mine Were of Mine Were of Trouble by Kemp.
Kemp.
And fascinating. It's like just learning a little bit more. Like Europe's such a complex place, and you know, last century was wild in Western Europe, and to see like the autobiography of somebody from inside who voluntarily like checked in to like go and serve in the Spanish Civil War is like, this is wild. Why does somebody go and do this? And there's sits in this much bigger cultural context. You hear about these ideologies and how they affected Western Europe and that sort of stuff, but then to see the sort of nitty gritty details on the inside in the life of someone like Kemp, it's absolutely fascinating. How have you guys found the journey of connecting directly with your audience and just going straight into publishing your stuff online, and how's that been for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. You know, as a primary. Interestingly, I dropped House of Sleep came out basically the same week or the same month at least that Art of Darkness started. So I went from essentially no internet profile whatsoever to gradually building an audience that is still growing episode to episode, and so. For me, Kevin referred to me as an introvert. That's pretty true. I did have to kind of like, okay, well, I'm actually going to do this. So how do you navigate this stuff? It's generally pretty great. I mean, one thing that's is amazing, and I always have fun doing, is when we have guests on our show, you get to meet, and when we go on other shows, we get to meet people who are doing other cool things that are maybe similar or maybe totally different, but have a sort of similar outlook on how to do this whole internet arts literary thing, and you get to run into all kinds of smart interesting people. We have our book club, and people come in there, and usually those people say smarter stuff than we do. We just sort of happened to be hosting it, so that's a lot of fun, and we get great suggestions from people, and a lot of love, and to every once in a while, maybe, there's a thing that I think, talking about that whole Killdozer thing, trying to bring that into it for just a second, there is a thing, and it's sort of a meme about how men never get any compliments or encouragement. And maybe that's true, but through what we've done, every once in a while somebody says something really nice, and it actually gets in. And it makes you smile. Somebody sends you a tweet, and something you did touch them in some way, and it's really, really cool.
They talk a lot of shit too. I've stopped reading. I've stopped reading the reviews. I mean, I will say that for somebody, you just got to kind of ignore the haters. And we have a Telegram chat. People can get at us directly. t.me/artofdarkpod. That's a lot of fun. If you want to show that you're an insider, get into the Telegram and immediately post your favorite pen. Like if you could get any pen in the world, like post that. People will know that you're hip.
I got these art ones here. I found my favorite pen
is here is a G2 Pilot G2.
This is
nice. All the
Uniball I find.
There you
it's
go.
Like a 0.3, and it's just like as soon as I started writing with it, my girlfriend, my partner, is an artist, and she's got like nice pencils, like these graphite pencils and stuff, and that she likes drawing with. And I just was snooping around. I've got my crappy ballpoint pens and stuff, and I was like, oh, this pen, I'll just use hers. And started using. I'm like, this is my pen now. I went and bought a whole bunch of them. So good.
You got to get in the Telegram chat. Get in the Telegram chat.
Yeah, try to convince you to use fountain pens, man.
Oh yeah, I'm totally good at
fountain pens. Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have an audience, and it's led to some very cool connections. And it started during the pandemic. I mean, where everybody was sort of cooped up, and the fact that and I'm sure a lot of podcasts started and then never went anywhere. I remember very early on, I had an old Twitter account that got whacked at the very end of the tenure.
You got whacked. Oh no!
Regime. I got whacked. I was literally like, there was like I was like the last shot before ceasefire, before Elon took over. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, right.
And I was under my name. I posted a lot of guillotines during the plague. I really did. I was not having any of it, and it's true. And but I remember there was a period when we were just starting the pod, and I encountered one of these swarms of particular leaning, and they started attacking me and getting really ad hominem and going through my tweets and everything, and they started making fun of our podcast for having like no listenership, and we had just started doing it 2 months earlier. And there was a part of me that, like, when I was younger, that really would have bothered me, right? But I was like, at the time, I'm just blocking these morons, and then now here we are. So I would that's a long way of saying, just never get discouraged. Keep doing it. It might take you 4 years before you lock in, when you're doing something like this. And if you have a franchise like we do where the episodes are evergreen, that's the best. Like there's room for like current event shows. I mean, Yeah, exactly. Like we just had Dexter De La Paz on, and he's from Timeline Earth. And, I had an idea for a podcast that's like a current events podcast that I may do down the line when I have enough money that I don't have to worry about being, having my but in any event, just if you're starting something like this, you got to start somewhere. And there might be somebody who comes to you and starts, talking smack about, you've got, 10 followers. Well, you got to have 10 followers at some point. Yeah. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, you got to
right?
start somewhere.
So,
and
just do it.
Yeah, I don't know. There's I'm here for it as well. Like this is part of the, sure, Frodo and Sam could have just gone on the Eagles and been dropped like straight in, like just drop the bloody ring straight in, like why? But then you lose the Lord of the Rings. Like there's no story there. We're here for not the ending, but for the journey.
There's an adventure to this stuff. Yeah, there's an adventure going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
we've got such an interesting listener base, and we've met some really interesting people through just like our online Discord chats and stuff. And it's been absolutely fascinating to meet people from such different backgrounds, different countries, different cultures, different career paths, and we've attracted like some really people from really widely different backgrounds, and I've really enjoyed that. Like we've got some like Germans and like Swiss people and Scandinavian people listening to us. Like I never would have guessed that like we'd have such a pickup in. I think Switzerland or Sweden is like just loves.
Okay.
We've
It's
got like
Sweden, yeah. We only
it's really,
only quite recently had more Australian listeners per month than Swedish listeners. Which
is that right?
is very odd.
We randomly will get
Swedes.
we will get seemingly randomly will chart in various countries.
Yeah, we were like the 7th in the books chart in Bulgaria last week. I don't know what that means,
Right.
But okay, hi,
Hey, Bulgaria. Hey, Bulgaria.
We were
It is cool
29th
to
most
see.
popular comedy podcast in Denmark at one point.
yeah, there you go.
That's great.
That's great. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Awesome.
Should we talk about the book?
I was just going to say, it's your show.
50 minutes in. Yeah, so when I reached out to you guys, I said, look, you can pick a book that you're interested in, if you feel it's underrated, if it's weird, if you like it, whatever. We'll read it, you can read it, we can chat about it. Mm-hmm. And you picked Point Omega by Don DeLillo. And so, first of all, why did you pick this book? Or did one of you pick the book and ask the other if they wanted to read it? Was it a group effort?
One reason is it's short, right, Brad?
No, that is a reason. Yeah,
that is a reason.
Part of it.
Yeah.
But Kevin, I don't know if you. I know Kevin and I had both read it before.
We read it around the same time. So in our, and I'll let you take over, Brad, but in our hive mind down at UT in the Michener program, books would circulate. And it was almost like everybody, it felt like everybody was reading the same 5 books at one point.
Yeah.
Under the Volcano went around, Point Omega went around. But yeah, Brad, go on.
Yeah, and so I think, Kevin, you may have said, let's talk about Point Omega. But I was totally on board because it's a book I absolutely love. And yes, it's short, but it's also, it's also great. So it's definitely worth reading. And you mentioned underrated, I think. When Don DeLillo does come up in conversation, it's certainly not the book that people refer to. People talk about Underworld, and they talk about White Noise, they talk about perhaps Cosmopolis. I mean, I think he has 16 or 17 novels. There's a lot to choose from. And so Point Omega kind of gets forgotten about, or is certainly less read than some of these other things. And I think it's worth talking about. I mean, I'm a Don DeLillo should have won the Nobel Prize. I'm on that side of things, I think all of his work pretty much is worth taking a look at. And it's weird. It is a weird book. It's actually weirder than it even seems at first. When you really sort of think about, okay, what actually happened here? What is the structure of this book? What is the payoff? What is actually occurring? It's a like I said, a deceptively strange piece of fiction, I think.
It's a very odd one. So my previous experience with Don DeLillo had only been White Noise that I read a number of years ago, and this was different. So I had heard that there's sort of the pre and post Underworld DeLillo, that his books prior to Underworld are more like what I expected Don DeLillo to be. with White Noise, and after Underworld, his books get shorter, more spare, more cryptic.
Yeah, White Noise is so wonderful as a student of Hitler studies myself. I think we're all professors of Hitler studies now, aren't we? I mean, that's one of the funniest books ever written. And I think Don DeLillo may be our greatest living author now that Cormac's dead. I mean, it's that, or I know people will say Pynchon. But in America, American. He's like a national treasure. He's like a top 5 living Americans in terms of like the arts and culture and really what else matters, I guess.
As you know, Jack, as you were saying, there is a pre and post Underworld kind of thing. Though there are pre-Underworld traces of where he was going with novels like The Names, which is good. And I don't know when Mao 2 came out. If that was pre or post Underworld, but yeah, there is a general move. He's becoming, as an author, perhaps more cerebral in a sense.
Mao 2 was 91, and so well before Underworld.
Underworld, okay, yeah, because this book, Mao 2 and this book, Point Omega, actually have a lot in common. If you were to go back and read Mao 2, but he's moving in this sort of cerebral direction, and there is a. There is a, how would I describe this? There is a sense in which he is, as a writer, if you were to kind of read through his works, from, chronologically, I have a difficult time articulating this. There is a way in which he's sort of dissolving. And not in terms of he loses his powers as they go on. He's Don DeLillo's sort of becoming like a fluid that fits into all of the spaces in a way. In this novel, Point Omega has this very sort of tenuous contact point with like politics or history or current events of 2009 when it came out, but it's only the vaguest of contact points, and the rest of it's kind of happening in this location that isn't even named. You couldn't point to where this book is happening on a map. The central, the middle, the huge middle section. I'm not talking about the bookends part of the film viewing. It's happening nowhere, and it's happening everywhere in a sense. And Cosmopolis wasn't quite like that, but that's sort of the direction that I think he was leaning, and
he's sort of heading to the Beckett place.
He is a bit, yeah, and partially, he has written a number of plays as well, and so I think there is, I think his plays and his fiction work are talking to each other, and
this could very much be a play.
Yeah, 100%.
And how did you? How has Don DeLillo's... Is that how you pronounce his name? Don DeLillo? Don DeLillo?
I say DeLillo.
Yeah,
I think it's DeLillo.
I know that, I think if I remember correctly, Brad, you said that in the blurb of House of Sleep that Don DeLillo was influential amongst some of the other authors that you referenced. So for both of you, are you able to maybe put a few words on how you think DeLillo's work has potentially... influenced like your work? Like, is it like an aesthetic thing that you feel like you've picked up, or is it more like atmospheric, or the specific themes that he's like conceptually trying to grapple with, or is there something else? How's it come into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for myself. It's a little bit of all those things. I mean, I think he is one of the preeminent sentence writers. They're just, and this book he's getting into that sort of sparer style, but earlier work it's a little bit more obviously complicated in terms of syntax and how a sentence is written and how a paragraph comes together. So there is an influence there. The one thing that I am very interested in about DeLillo, and this is perhaps very maybe a little too craft-headed, but DeLillo does a kind of thing. He writes in moments, and you see it a lot in Point Omega. He writes these sort of anti-scenes, I guess. They're arranged like scenes. They're sort of, to borrow a theatrical term, they're blocked like scenes. But then when you actually look at what the tissue of the scene is, what the arc of the scene is. Sort of fiction writing 101 is like, well, you write a scene, and every scene has to be like a line that can't be gone back, right? Every scene is like a Rubicon. You can't go back to before that scene, and there is a little bit of that. But if you try to plot what the arc of them is, there sort of isn't one. There's sort of, it's kind of disembodied. And other writers, I think, will try to do that. You see that kind of similar sort of thing happening in like a lot of sort of auto fiction and things and styles that are fashionable now. But when it's DeLillo, it doesn't feel like it's because he doesn't know how to write a scene. It's because he's actually, the thrust of the scene is something cerebral and philosophical and almost below the conscious level that's happening. Sort of somewhat between the lines. And so that's something that has influenced me, is like, okay, this is what my characters are saying. What are they actually saying? What are the things that, what's being said by what they don't say? What is it implying? How does it tie back to other things? And so that's kind of a long-winded, crafty way to say, like, I admire wholeheartedly the way that Don DeLillo just gets the pieces on the stage and makes them interact, and doesn't really even necessarily give you a plot, and yet it's very compelling at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah. Go on.
Sorry, go on.
No, after you.
No, please go on.
Well, I mean, I have so many thoughts racing through my head as Brad is saying this, because at first I was thinking, I haven't really thought about the consciously, but now I remember that I have, and it's all coming back to me now, as they say. He's a genius of structure. His structures are incredible, and at the sentence level, he somehow manages to evoke the structure of his metaphor on that level, on the micro level, but also the macro level. All of his work, or I'm not going to say all, but yeah, all of his work sort of concerns the novel. He does this weird Brechtian thing where he periodically reminds you that you're consuming a piece of media. Like this novel is about a piece of art, a piece of media. It's about 24 Hour Psycho, which is a real world art installation that was done, I believe, by a Scottish artist in the 90s, where he slowed Psycho down so that it would take exactly 24 hours to play. That's the bookend of the novel. Omega naturally evokes the alpha, so you've got the alpha and the omega. The novel is structured in that way, where it's bookended by two scenes happening in, right? You've got the word point, it's the knife. The knife is what they find in the desert. The knife calls back to Psycho. There's almost this idea that possibly the middle of the novel is a dream that this possible killer is having, as he's watching 24 Hour Psycho, which then, of course, begs you to reflect on the nature of the novel itself. Is this murderous dream that DeLillo is having, or are we projecting ourselves onto it? Projection like the projection of... Do you see what I'm saying? So he opens up this like metacognitive thing, but also like you could read it like an airport novel. You could read it like, people say Don DeLillo is great. What's this? Right? And it also loops. Like, I want to go back and reread it now, and that's intentional and on purpose. So, and he does that wonderful thing, and maybe the most obvious thing that like a Philistine could appreciate, somebody who isn't really a literature person, could appreciate in terms of what he does is read Falling Man, which is the novel that he wrote prior to this. Which is about 9/11, and the very first 3 pages, the cadence of the sentences are like the buildings falling down. And he does that poetic metaphor on a line-by-line level, which then becomes the entire structure of the novel, the man falling. And you are the falling man as you're reading the novel, falling through the pages, falling through the words. And very few authors can pull this off. Very few people ever even achieve this level of consciousness around literature and what literature is capable of doing. So when somebody says the novel is dead, it's like, well, no, Don DeLillo's novels aren't dead. You're just reading garbage. There's more that can be done. And so in my own work, I would say, he has an influence in as much as that I always look for that level of structural metaphor and don't always pull it off, but he's a genius.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, there's an almost fractal nature to the structure on that level. Yeah. Yeah. It's quite.
That's certainly one thing that I try to think of as an ethic personally as a writer is how do you make it so that in sort of fractal terms, it's like, how do you make it so that, like, every sentence is somehow the story, right? Every element is. You kind of can't take anything out, or the whole thing falls apart. How do you manage that? And DeLillo's sort of making it look easy in this book again. And I always love it when people make something incredibly hard look easy. I was reading some reviews of this, and one of them described how DeLillo, sort of talking about DeLillo's his lean prose. Well, the thing about DeLillo, and I think a lot about sort of the virtues of a Hemingway style versus whatever the opposite of that is, right? But DeLillo is doing this very deliberately. I mean, there is an airy openness to the setting in the middle portion of the book. And so the prose is effectively doing that too. He's not going to give you lush physical details because, as Kevin talks about, maybe it's a dream. That kind of corrupts the dream in some way. He's trying to make it so everything sort of floats above the ground a little bit, and thereby he's not going to give you all the details that he could. I mean, if he wanted to write The Tunnel by William Gass, he could have done that for sure, but it didn't suit the purposes of what he was trying to accomplish as a project. And I think that's another thing I admire about him is his, every writer's kind of got a bandwidth that they can occupy successfully, but his is, I think, much wider than most, and he's able to adapt what he's doing on a scene to paragraph to sentence to scene level for the project.
He's also a man of the contemporary world in a way that someone like Cormac maybe wasn't quite. Like, Cormac feels like a man out of time, which is his genius. And that's great. And but DeLillo feels like very much a man of our time.
DeLillo answers emails,
That's what right.
He's got like a Google Calendar.
He certainly feels that way. And he's in conversation with technology and with media. And of course Cormac is as well, but maybe not quite as directly, where it's not a theme necessarily in Cormac. It's certainly a theme in DeLillo. What is the book? What are we even doing here? What is film? What is a phone? What is? It's all there in his work, and that's super. To me, that's extraordinarily important and necessary. Right.
And other than potentially shortness, but what was it about Point Omega of? Because the guy is prolific. He's written so much that is particularly interesting to talk about. Of all his works that you guys have read quite a bit of his stuff, like, what is it about this one that you find compelling?
Well, didn't we? Because this went around in grad school. It's not the obvious choice, which is the obvious choice would be White Noise or Underworld. But Brad, you and I both, in the green room, right? Yesterday we were chatting, and it's like it seems simpler than it did when we first read it, right?
In some ways, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I maybe suggested it because I wanted to reread it.
That's a pretty big vote, like +1 for the book.
For sure. To go back to something is a huge vote. Can I just read like 4 sentences?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Read as many as you like. Read the whole book. We'll see.
Okay. So this is the kind of thing that drew me back to it, because I wanted to. When this came up, I was like, oh yeah, I'm excited to get back into this vernacular and this sort of philosophical. That's not really the right word. That space. This is from about a third of the way through the book. Quote. It's all about time, dimwit time, inferior time, people checking watches and other devices, other reminders. This is time draining out of our lives. Cities were built to measure time, to remove time from nature. There's an endless counting down, he said. When you strip away all the surfaces, when you see into it, what's left is terror. This is the thing that literature was meant to cure, the epic poem, the bedtime story. And reading that, and in some ways that's very quotable. You can just throw that in a tweet and people will maybe glom onto it, but then also like understanding how that's actually woven into this larger thing that he's doing in the work. I hate the word exploration. Whenever somebody's like, well, it's an exploration of this, and I was like, but it sort of is.
It's a meditation on it. It is.
He's feeling, part of the thing he's doing in the book is he's feeling through the nature of time. What is time? And also, but with a consciousness that our sense of it, and perhaps the nature of time itself, has actually been changed by technological progress, right? Mm-hmm. Time doesn't mean to us what it meant to somebody. Kevin and I are both researching Shakespeare. Time doesn't mean the same thing to us as it did to them. I don't know exactly what it meant to them, but they didn't have a watch on their wrist, and they didn't have a phone constant. They were contacting it differently. And DeLillo will just drop that on you, and then you kind of just have to read the rest of the book sort of living with that.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you even what he meant by that beyond what he just said. But that's sort of simmering now. That's sort of simmering. It's a meme that's gotten into my head as I'm reading the rest of the book, and it brings other aspects of it to light or to life.
Yeah, for sure. I've been thinking a lot
those
about
sorts
time
of moments.
recently. It's quite a wild concept. Like this, it's like so. In one of my favorite books, The Fabric of Reality by David Deutsch, he explores like different strands of like scientific theories, like the big ones, and he's got this chapter on time as like a quantum concept, and importantly, he makes this. I've read that chapter so many times; it's like it's so hard to get my head around. But one of the points he makes is like, look, when we first learn like basic like Newtonian models of like physics and that sort of stuff, we're always making reference to this time axis outside of the system itself, as if time is somehow external to the system. Like Newton had this conception of there being almost like a heartbeat to the universe. It's like abstract. That's not physical itself. That is, it's a metaphysical assumption in Newton's like worldview. But under like at least sort of the people who followed on from Everett's like Hugh Everett's publications, they're like, wait a second, actually, we only ever reference physical systems with a definite physical like periodicity, and there's no metaphysical external timekeeper of the universe. And when you also then think about the history of chronological or like chronopieces or whatever, you actually realize okay, the standardization of time and the very what would you say, the low variance of the unit that we use to cut up our experience is actually a very modern invention. Really, it was the French and the British and the Spanish who are having these naval I guess what would you say, naval competitions, essentially. They had to figure out how to make a timepiece that would essentially keep consistent time on the open seas and stuff, and all this sort of interesting stuff. But a lot of the timekeeping devices before that were things like sundials, where the actual periodicity is quite fluid, because that's going to change with how the season is changing and the length of the day and all that sort of stuff. And if you go and spend some time just out in the bush camping or in a community where they don't really pay attention to that stuff, your sense of time becomes so you usually unplug from this universal population synchronization schema that we've got going on that is very artificial, and then you go camping or you go out bush or whatever, and you get into sync with what's happening in terms of the changes in temperature and the environment and the sunlight and all this sort of stuff, not what's this external hardware device. It's super interesting. It's amazing, isn't it? They explore that.
I mean, and our pre-modern ancestors were living in liturgical time and biblical time.
Yeah, mythological.
Hundreds of years.
Well,
and we no longer
nomos.
live there.
Say some people say, yeah.
And the word omega here is certainly evocative of the alpha and the omega, and the telos of whatever it is we're doing here now in modernity.
It's so interesting.
Postmodernity.
I'm indigenous. My family's Indigenous Australian, and we have this idea of like Dreamtime stories, and we didn't have we had like an oral tradition. We didn't have like writing and that sort of stuff before Europeans came here. We had artwork, but there's like I feel like the sort of like cross culturally there's this like when people started writing and then accruing that knowledge and like putting a kind of chronology to it, it sort of creates this sense of history, like say for example like 2,000 years ago, a man named Jesus of Nazareth existed. Like, there's a sense of 2,000 years, and what does that mean? And like, whereas for some of like my cultural background with regards to the Indigenous stuff, like Aboriginal Australian stuff, like we don't know how long ago it was. Like, it could be tens of thousands of years ago, some of this stuff. But a community might exist with like knowing where these like say like ancient like artworks are within like their like region, and all that we knew is that they were there for like a long time, essentially. Like our ancestors made them
Forever,
and like
sort of.
forever, like, and there's a sense of like the word that we use is like since time immemorial. Like there's like the Uluru Statement and stuff. It's quite beautiful, and obviously like there's like, okay, well, the actual physical thing that happened was like the migration out of Africa, and we know that humans have been here in Australia for like maybe 50 to 60 or so thousand years. But if you haven't got those reference points in your culture, really, like anybody who's died in the past, they could have died like 1 or 2 generations ago, or they could have died 1,000 generations ago, you know. And yeah, it's really fascinating, this like the culture out of which we come and how that gives us a sense of history. Or is that mythological history, or is that just like kind of factual, explicit history? Or it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm interested too. Like anytime you see when some ancient artifact is dated by like carbon dating, it's like I assume that number is roughly correct, but also
they'll be like plus or minus 1,000 years.
Right, but you're told that number as though like, oh, we understand it.
Yeah.
Here you go. It was 5. You're like, you don't have any of the context. You don't know what came before it, came after it. You don't know, like, had they invented our agriculture? That, like, there's so many things, and we sort of say, oh, well, we got a number. We have a number that we were able to put on it. So we understand that now. We know what drawer it goes into. Problem solved.
Yeah.
And like, it doesn't actually answer any of the questions.
Experientially, it doesn't help, does it? Like,
no, not really.
Like, what does
no.
it mean? Yeah.
Yeah, there's I've been fascinated in this sort of time subject. There's a great Romanian writer. He wrote some fiction, but he's primarily known as like an anthropologist and sort of interpreter, understander of religion. Mircea Eliade. And he has a book called The Eternal Return, which is different than Nietzsche's Eternal Return. And he would say...
Yeah, if you all don't know Eliade, you should cover him on your show. Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah. He talks about the idea that ancient man, sort of prehistorical man, would have had no understanding of like linear time in the strong sense. Maybe during a day they would, like they know they ate, and then after they eat they go do the thing. But all of their activities, all of the things they did, they would have understood as them participating in an infinite cycle of that thing being done. So when you build the fire, you're building all of the fires that every man has ever built, right? Nothing is like a rational economic subunit of anything else. You are constantly engaged in what is essentially the mythology of what is being a human being. So everything you go to get the water from the river. You go to get the water from the river. You doing that is you're the one little node on the fractal of that having been done forever.
Yeah.
And we have to think about, and that's probably partially the reason why, in some ways, human civilization occurred very quickly, but there have been long periods where nothing really changed, and that's probably part of the reason. Why would you do something different? This is what has always been done. This is how we've always done it. Why are you inventing something else to add to this, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. We had I don't know enough of the details just because I've been like focusing too much on like Western education. But like at least like one of the like parts of the like my particular family is like mythological, like I don't know, what would you say, like spiritual or religious like stories from pre-European contact. It was like this idea of a child's spirit, whatever that is, I don't know, like spirit, is associated with a particular place. Oftentimes, like for where my family's from in New South Wales, it was like a certain like landmark, and you'd be born at a particular tree, and you'd have a birthing tree, and you'd mark the tree. So there's like some ancient trees that they're marked, and like we try to get them heritage listed. A lot of people try not to get them heritage listed so they can like cut them down and stuff, but like a lot of communities try to get these like scar trees, we call them scar trees, where like we know pre-European, like those were places where people were born, and so you'd scar the tree, and that's associated, and then that helps your spirit remember when you die to go back to your birthing place, and you like re-enter the cycle. And there's this like idea that the child chooses their parents, and that like it's not just a one-way relationship. There's this there's some reason why you've chosen your parents to live this particular life in, and then you die, you go back to your your birthing place where like your mother was like there, and then you go back into this cycle. And yeah, it's really interesting. It's like intensely connected with the landscape itself, and yeah, there's this like cyclical, there's almost like this sense that it's like it's always been here and we've always been a part of it, and it's not there's this lack of linearity to it. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's super interesting.
I love that. And this is the thing, so I don't think we mentioned about this book where the term Point Omega comes from. I don't know if
we'll jump into it.
It comes from Pierre Teilhard Desjardins, who's a French Jesuit paleontologist, writer, anthropologist, many things. We actually talk about him on an episode we did on Flannery O'Connor over at Art of Darkness. So we do I think that the part where we really talk about Chardin is maybe behind the paywall. But anyway, he had this notion that he was a Jesuit. He was a sort of a heretical I shouldn't even say sort of. He was a heretical Jesuit, and he had this notion that one way to kind of put it is that essentially you wouldn't even say history, all of biological evolution is essentially to create, we're sort of growing towards something that is beyond the physical. So we're starting with just like minerals, and trending towards something that will trending towards something that will transcend the merely biological and physical and exist out in a sort of a dissipated manner in something called the noosphere that would survive the heat death of the universe, right? Okay. And now the most clearly sort of Christian part of it was in his notion. Jesus, the point, would it be the point of Jesus? One of Jesus's roles was to show us how to, as a species, as humans, to continue that process and basically show us that like what is ultimately going to draw us towards that thing is love. And so that's where this Point Omega thing comes from. And it's interesting to try and think about like, okay, why is this concept relative to this book something more than just something that's mentioned by one of the characters? Why is it the title of the book? And what does that have to do with what's happening in this book? And I got thinking about that a lot today. And I guess the first question, I'm not trying to like totally steer this thing, but there is something I'm dying to know from you guys, what you think. And I swear this is related. What happens to Jesse in this book?
Yeah, that's a cryptic one. It's
So I mean, for people who maybe haven't read it, do you? How much do you guys spoil on this show? 'Cause it's
given how spare events are in this book, I think we can spoil stuff because it's not learning what happens in sort of a biographical sense. I don't think spoils the book.
Yeah.
The act of inhabiting this strange sense of time this strange sense of place, being drawn into an altered time through 24-hour Psycho, then into the desert, then being spat out the other side back into 24-hour Psycho. That altered consciousness, at least I feel, is one of the most valuable parts of this book. That's a very long way of saying it, spoil away, because I don't think it'll actually ruin people's experience.
So fundamentally, there's in the middle part of the book, there's three characters, right?
And the narrator of the middle part of the book is counting his days in the desert.
He is,
for what that's worth.
Yeah, and he's sort of like losing track-ish, it seems like.
Yeah, and it's almost like he's kind of getting up toward 40 days.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. And the one of the other characters' daughters kind of shows up, and she's a sort of a strange figure. And then at some point, they go out. The two men go out for supplies or whatever, and they come back, and she's just gone, and didn't take any of her stuff with her. She's just gone, and the search parties are assembled. They find a knife, but it's not even clear it has anything to do with it. I mean, if you search thousands of acres, you're going to find stuff. And then nobody knows what happened to her. There's no explanation. The book never tells you what happened to her, or really, it implies certain things. And I think it you want to start picking it apart like a criminal case, but there's very little to even go on. So, I don't know. Do like people have like, oh, this person did it, or this is what she did? I don't know.
Well, the obvious interpretation is that the man watching 24-Hour Psycho is her stalker and has followed them out to the desert in order to abduct her and act out the violence of the 24 hours of Psycho. That is, she goes to the desert to get away from this stalker character. That's the on-the-surface interpretation. But having read it now 2 or 3 times, I'm not sure that's what happens. And I think that's the point. And the narrator in the middle is implicated somehow, because he has there's this weird, creepy sexual turn. DeLillo is very erotic, too. He doesn't shy away from the erotic. And masculine eroticism and voyeurism is very much present in DeLillo's work. And he always implicates the reader, too, in a very sly way. So there's are we to trust this narrator in the middle?
Right.
It's really
I thought a lot about that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Somewhat depends on how much you want to have a gamble. Is this like a fantasy? Is this a dream? Because I don't know. There's a weakness that can come up in fiction if you lean too heavily on the dream. Because in a dream, at the end of the day, you can make anything you want happen, and you can just disregard, you can disregard the truth, the internal truth of the story itself, and that can sometimes feel cheap. Like like Deus Ex Machina sort of thing going on, and
if at the end you just say, "Oh, by the way, it was all a dream."
So, but he didn't do that in this book. But he played this like, what would you say to it? Like the sense I got is there's almost like a wispiness, to it, and so like, even if it were just a dream, sometimes you wake up from dreams and obviously all sorts of strange things can happen, and you sort of like, class 1 would be like flying in a dream, like that doesn't make any sense, but inside the dream it makes sense. And yet sometimes you have these dreams where something happens in the dream and according to the dream it didn't make sense, like not according to like declarative like laws of physics or whatever, but that there's something off about, hey, why was there this particular narrative discontinuity within the structure of my dream, not necessarily the physical discontinuity. And it might be like a character thing, like a relationship with a person that or like something that's going on in your life or whatever. And I feel like he captured that aspect of dream continuity. Like it doesn't necessarily matter on some level if it were a dream, because he maintain the integrity of that aspect of it, and so it does leave it open, and open in a way that even if you were to say, oh well, this was an ethereal dreamscape sort of aspect to it, that still doesn't answer like, okay, but why does it matter that in this person's like introspection that this this person went missing. Like, that still matters. Yeah, I don't know. It's like leaves it hanging. What do you reckon, Jack?
I think I feel similarly to you in that I was less interested in what happened to Jesse, in a sense of being able to say explicitly, okay, well, this physical event happened to Jesse at this time, enacted by this particular person. I found it more interesting was the effect of her disappearance on Elster, the man that Jim, the person narrating, at least ostensibly narrating the central part of the book, the second of the three sections of this book, what that did to him, how prior to her disappearance, he was very philosophical, or at least talked a lot about the nature of space, the nature of time, the different qualities of space and time, say, in a city versus in the desert. It was very cerebral. And a lot of his life was also very much based on obsession with Jessie, so really focusing on his daughter's life. And then with her disappearance, this flipped. So the obsession was still there, but it's defined by that lack. And all of his philosophizing about time and space falls away. And he becomes this mute old man. Mm-hmm. And so what I found most interesting about Jessie's disappearance was not really any question of what might have actually happened to her. It was that change, or that point through which Elster passed in really altering how he viewed time and space, or at least how he presented his views of time and space.
Oh, I like that a lot. I mean, there is a sense in which Elster does become, he sort of on one level becomes grounded by, because as you say, like a lot of the sort of philosophical stuff just becomes intellectual when it happens, and it's not necessarily suddenly it doesn't bear on the actual moment. So there is a sort of a grounding effect. I am very interested in elemental symbology, and Kevin's rolling his eyes because I bring this up.
It's
all
like
the time.
alchemy, like tarot.
Yeah, well, earth, air, water, and fire, right? And this is a novel of air and earth primarily.
Yeah.
And air isn't just about air, but it's also about, it has correspondences in sort of Jungian thought and in other places that it has to do with rationalization and cerebration, or whatever, cognitive frontal lobe activity. And Elster is very much, he's a man lost in, not even quite lost. I mean, he's made his bones. Yeah, it's kind of he made his bones on this very strange essay about exploring the etymology of the word rendition, and then he gets kind of caught up in this rationalization of the war machine process because of that. And Jessie is sort of the other side of air, which is sort of blown away. I mean, it's funny because I got reading this, and the reason I asked that question is because on this reading, I just decided that what happened is exactly what Don DeLillo tells us on page 81. He says, passing into air, it seemed this is what she was meant to do. Like, I think I think the implication, whether this happened like in the real world, I think the implication is that she sort of just dissolved. She sort of just disappeared. It's kind of like she isn't anywhere now. Is sort of the implication, and whether or not that actually happened within the frame of the book, that is now how Elster and Jim sort of have to live with it. Because there's the great scene when they realize, like, hey, we're not going to find her. We got to, like, get out of the desert now.
And on some level, that is, like, the impermanence of all things, but especially when it comes to, like, people in our life. So, it's like, at some point, the person just does disappear, and it's not even like sand. It's like, being blown away on, like, a beach or something, where it's like the particles are there, they're just like redispersed. On some level, like when somebody like dies, for example, like it's not merely that they're physical party. There's some like non-physical component that's like really truly like inaccessible, and it's not merely just the scattering of of like the physical particles into like the rest of the particles that are going on the planet. There's this like real sense of like non-reversibility to it, and yeah, that sense of like being blown away in that sense, like becoming aware. I think that's a really good point. Like,
and she also had I couldn't find it. She had parts when she was a child. She used to touch herself to make sure she was there.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
She's referred to as being her own imaginary friend at one point. So there's something about this that she's sort of like not quite physical being in a way.
There's this weird suggestion too, somehow. You could do a reading of this where the narrator in the middle is also the narrator bookending, and he fabricated his doppelganger. Like, he imagined the scene where he walks in, where the narrator in the middle walks in with the professor. Right. Like, he's been split in twain. There's a very you could do a Lynchian reading of this, where it's the same character and he is guilty of disappearing Jessie. I mean, what does he want to do? He wants to put her father up against the wall.
He does,
and interview him with and put a camera on him. And there's all this implication that there's like a kind of like violence is implied in that. I mean, that would be the one layer removed sort of.
No, I like that.
Sophisticated reading of it, but it's only implied, and that's the fun of a great work like this, is that it's sort of all those things and none of them.
Yeah, I think. Well, one, it's man, you guys should read Jack's book. I think like you'd really like it. It's
I want to.
Yeah, Tower, Jack VC on Amazon. Like I think like there's a lot of stuff that overlaps with Jack's things that he explores in his book. It's great.
Awesome.
One of the things about reading works that are just this masterful, though, is that at once you feel really inspired to go right, and also you think, man, why do I bother? This is... It's unreal, both the structure, but also how he works with prose in this book to allow all of these different interpretations, because I feel like the prose is... I read some reviews which claim that the characters lack depth, which I don't really agree with, because I feel like the prose is this strange, has this odd fragmentary quality. It almost feels like you're occupying a small piece of land in the sky, and the prose allows you to look off it, and you can see this sort of this obscure depth. And the book just feels like a succession of these suspended bits of land, and you can see that there's depth under there. It's just hinted at. It exists not quite explicitly, not quite implicitly. It feels like there is a whole world under there. You're just not quite able to get close enough to make out explicit details.
I like that a lot. And there's also something too that I noticed in this read, when the characters, particularly Elster, but really us as the reader and Jimmy, when they look back at like the real world that they kind of come from, like imagine that they are on like a piece of land, the real world looks strange. It's like you got to like look through. Like, let me just kind of read this one little bit when Elster's talking to Jimmy and he says. I know about your marriage. You had the kind of marriage where you tell each other everything. You told her everything. I look at you and see this in your face. It's the worst thing you can do in a marriage. Tell her everything you feel. Tell her everything you do. That's why she thinks you're crazy. I'm not talking about secrets or deceptions. I'm talking about being yourself. If you reveal everything, bear every feeling, ask for understanding, you lose something crucial to your sense of yourself. You need to know things the others don't know. It's what no one knows about you that allows you to know yourself. And like, that's a sentiment I don't think I've ever heard anybody say. And then I read that and I'm like, there is a kernel of truth to that. Right? There is something to that, but it felt like a looking back at the real world and being like, the way you guys think it should go, it's off. I can see from here that something is not quite right. And there's a handful of examples of that sort of thing in this book.
You've really got to maintain.
And it creates this detachment from the lived-in world.
You've really got to maintain the mystique, just keep up the mystery. It's been all the time. How's your day,
as
honey?
we learned in our episode,
where was I? I don't even know.
Practical female psychology for the practical man.
Yeah. Yeah.
which I'm sure Don DeLillo was referencing quite heavily in this work.
Sure.
You've got to maintain permanent mystique.
You have to maintain frame. Maintain frame at all times.
Turns out that Point Omega was actually a very, very cryptically written pickup artist manual.
It could be.
Well, if you can get her alone in the desert, right? Hey, right.
Step one. Yeah.
Because of the
Either
implication.
close or she'll disappear.
Just make sure her father isn't there with you. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a rookie mistake he made. To have
Well,
met
guys,
with
I
her
gotta-
father first.
I got to shoot here in a few minutes. I don't know how much, don't feel like you got to stop just because I got to go. But I got to go prepare this Shakespeare episode.
Oh,
for tomorrow.
fantastic.
So
Yeah.
Is it all right if I beg off? And Brad, can you want to carry it from here?
Yeah, yeah, for a bit. Yeah.
Awesome. But I just want to say how grateful I am for having us on. Thank you so much. Everybody check out artofdarkpod.com. Get into the Telegram, t.me/artofdarkpod. It's so much fun. And yeah, I'm going to check out more of your episodes for sure. I'm definitely going to listen to the Killdozer episode. Give me one other
I
episode.
think
that
you'll
you all
like the
think is
Killdozer
like a banger.
episode. I saw you guys covered Mishima. I think we really liked Mishima.
Oh, we did do Sun and Steel,
Sun and
yeah.
Steel. That's I think that's a classic. Open offer. Like if you guys want to cover one of your works, that'd be really cool.
That'd be cool. That sounds
If that's
awesome.
something that you'd be
Yeah.
interested in the future, really fun interviewing you guys, and obviously if we can promote your
we can have
work
a
and
book club
stuff,
from Heaven episode.
that'd be cool as well.
Well, let me see for sure. I mean, Brad's got the novel coming out, and then let me see how Basilisk
Nice,
comes out, because I
nice.
might take you up on that.
Nice.
Thank you, Levi, Jack. Thank you so much. All right, Brad, I'll chat with you tomorrow when we do the Bard. All right?
See you, Kevin. Lovely.
Later,
meeting you.
fellas.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Nice to meet you guys.
We can continue for a bit till you're...
Yeah, just
Sure.
let us know
You're
when
ready
you
to
want to
go.
check
Yeah,
out. We, I don't know
yeah,
if
I
you
can
look,
probably
but we
get
have
a little bit
also
here.
a track record of doing 4-hour episodes. So we're
episodes. So
what is it? Ride or die, baby. We're good to
there
go.
you go. Yeah,
so
well,
you let us know when you want
Once
to
you
check
get
out.
going, a lot of stuff starts jumping up. No, I know. I hear I probably got another 20
Nice,
minutes or
nice,
half an
nice,
hour.
nice.
I can do.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So one thing. Jack, I think you said you'd read White Noise before. Is that am I remembering that right?
It was,
Yeah.
It was a while ago, and on the basis of this, I do want to go back through Don DeLillo's catalogue and read the pre-Underworld novels, but probably read more like Point Omega, because this was really unique. I read it in one sitting.
Yeah.
And the altered state I got into from reading this was unreal. I really want more like that.
Yeah, I think I would recommend Cosmopolis. Is quite a bit different. It has some of the same feel. But yeah, Cosmopolis is pretty great. I didn't read his most recent novel, but I did read 0K, which is sort of his second to most recent. And it's about the efforts for certain wealthy people to freeze themselves after they die so they can be brought back to life, which is and it's pretty fascinating. Sort of a religious order kind of develops around it, and it's pretty cool. So there's a lot of good stuff. And Underworld is an all-time. It's an all-timer for sure, but you got to dedicate a month to it. Basically, it's like taking on Moby Dick or something like that. You gotta buckle in and for sure. But it's a masterpiece, absolutely.
Yeah, I did say that Underworld was very substantial.
Yeah, it's big.
And was quite pleased that this book is it's a very approachable length, and one that really works in its favor, because I'm not sure that this sort of atmosphere, this sort of elusiveness, this sort of book which seems, the characters in it seem so suspicious of explicitness. So there's this sense in the desert with this strange, vague time. He's not sure how long he's been there. They're talking about how the standardized clock time in the cities is time of ruin and stress and anxiety. How there's always, when they make contact with the outside world, like for example when they call Elster's ex-wife, there's this very odd feeling of you as the reader occupying this very indistinct world of suggestions, and this sudden intrusion of quite concrete questions like, oh, what was this man's name? Was this man's name Dennis, for example? What was Jesse doing on these particular days?
Right.
That explicitness feels very, very alien.
Yeah, there is like
And
a sense of
the-
like, oh my gosh, now we have to like participate in the actual world somehow.
Yeah.
Now. Like, yeah.
It's incredible how in so few words, because I don't know how many words this would be, because the edition I have at least, it's 100 and something pages. There aren't many words on each page too. The font is really big.
Yeah,
a lot of whites, a lot of margin on each
probably
page.
25,000 words, I would say,
Yeah.
if I had to just guess. Yeah.
But in that brief period, he actually managed to make me feel like an outsider to a more rigid world that I inhabit most days. It's really remarkable. I did notice that he's very taken with short novels now, or is writing quite short novels. I found that really interesting, how he's moving from writing novels where a great deal is said, or a great deal is said in a great number of words, to ones that are elusive, that just allude to things very, very strongly and then almost disintegrate under their own weight.
Yeah, I think that's true in his oeuvre, and it's an interesting phenomenon as a writer. I think partially that comes from a book like Underworld. I'm not going to talk about it too much because it's not really the subject, but a book like Underworld probably almost kills you to write. You know, it's the kind of thing that almost no one can pull off, right? Because it's on this sort of like infinite jest, gravity's rainbow kind of scale, right? Moby Dick. So it's almost impossible to do. And then I have a feeling that you do something like that, and afterwards, it's not even necessarily that you want to just do something easier. It's sort of like, I'm just going to write about stuff kind of around the edge of that thing. Like, you know, I did this enormous, it was everything I could have thought about or said or imagined. Now the rest of his career seems to be like picking up like little shards off of the edge and figuring those out. They're sort of like, you know, after, because there are correspondences between Point Omega and Underworld, not in characters or anything like that, but in just like thematically. And you do get the sense that, like, you know, this could have actually been a chapter in Underworld, and probably would have worked, sort of. Yeah.
You're really selling Underworld. It's good.
It's so good. Now I want to go read it again. I don't have time to read anything that's off. I have like a reading schedule, and it's not on there. So, but eventually, yeah. Well, one day Don DeLillo will pass from this earth, and we will cover him on Art of Darkness.
Yeah. It's that's so interesting. Like when you look at things like an author's total body of work. So I probably haven't. The only there's been a couple. Every now and then, I'll just become like obsessed with an author. Doesn't happen that often, but I'll just basically try to read everything they've written. Sometimes they've written too much, and I'm just like, I can't actually do it, but I'll try and get through a big chunk of it.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting, the way that you've described DeLillo's body of work and the way they relate to one another. I guess given that you've read at least a few of his texts. Not you haven't read everything of his, I assume. But
I think 6.
Yeah, so a good chunk. Like, how would you?
Yeah.
Could you sort of like paint us a picture of that entire landscape of his body of works, and where, in particular, like Point Omega, you feel like where it fits into that?
Yeah, I think so. Probably the earliest one I read by him, I did read Americana, but that was sort of almost. It's a lot of people love it as his first novel. It's almost kind of like juvenilia, it feels like, especially when you set it next to something like Underworld. You know, the earliest book other than that of his I read, I think, is Libra, and Libra is it's about the JFK assassination, and it takes fairly seriously conspiracy theories about the JFK assassination, and Lee Harvey Oswald is a perspective character in it. And it deals with the CIA, and it deals with Cuba and all of these things, but it also deals with like the actual personality of a person like Lee Harvey Oswald, both according to the official story, but also in the conspiratorial mode if the CIA was involved. And you know, and it's interesting because I've been the mimetic concept of conspiracy theory has become like more of a discussion point, not even a specific conspiracy theory, but as a thing in and of itself, right? And people are, you're a conspiracy theorist, and I kind of expected that book to get brought into the conversation more because it's a total masterpiece. It's definitely goes against the mainstream narrative you're supposed to have about the work, but it also like doesn't ever quite land on exactly why all of this stuff happened. And it's not overtly political. Like, you don't necessarily come away with it, thinking, oh, we really got to like reform something. It's not really about that. It has to do with how pieces. It has to do with sort of the machine of modern living, like how it becomes something that runs on its own in a sense, and then when it actually makes contact with human beings, people get ground up in the gears, so to speak, psychically and physically sometimes. So that's sort of earlier work. And then Underworld, like I don't even know how to like what's the entry point to that. Underworld is. It's not the setting of it or whatever isn't a dream, but it operates like a dream in your own mind. He's putting things next to each other that are very sophisticated, open-ended, almost allegories about like being alive in the 20th and 21st century, and he's sort of putting them next to each other and they're humming as he does this, and he's doing this for hundreds of pages, and sort of stretching them up into mythology, or down into mythology and up into the dream, and it's also, but he's also using a lot of like the now somewhat derided postmodern techniques of bringing actual historical figures in as characters and putting words in their mouth. He's doing a fair amount of that. He's playing almost Joycean level games with structure, and this chapter is going to be written in this style, and the next chapter is going to be written in a different style, and it's for the reader to feel through that. And then after Underworld, it's sort of like, one way I can kind of think of it is like, Underworld is using all of the techniques and all of the colors and everything, and then now he's sort of like, what if I do a watercolor and I just use these two colors? What can I make with that? Like what? And I think you see this in a lot of artists as they sort of, some people maybe do that right off the bat, but you see this as a lot of artists as they sort of mature. They kind of give themselves very strict constraints, and then all the magic happens within these very strict boundaries that they've given themselves.
Yeah, kind of has
and
a
I think
sense
that's
of
what
like
he's doing later in his career.
Almost like like a Philip Glass, or like some post-classical, like really stripped back. Like you can go and listen to obviously Baroque or like a Tchaikovsky or something, and you can have like a lot of complexity there. And I think something like Philip Glass or Ludovico Einaudi, like they're these composers that are capable of a lot of complexity, and then some of their work they just like strip it bare, and the pacing of it and all this sort of stuff. It's like they're exploring like elements of their craft, not necessarily in isolation, but like there's this intentional sense of like less. And it's almost like, but it sounds like the musical analogy that I'm using, it sounds like that's what potentially like DeLillo's sort of, he's like, okay, he's in some sense, I don't know if he'd say it like this, but like proven that he can do the big the big complex thing. He doesn't need to prove himself in that sense. And now there's like this, okay, what if we have this like finesse, this exploration of like just small parts of the world of what it means to create literature. And I have a deep respect for artists who can how would you say, complexly explore the stripped away version of what they're doing. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and you talk about like sort of proving that he has the chops. I think that's one element of it. But I also think, so, you know, I sort of struggle with this creatively sometimes too. It's like, you know, I love the big maximalist crazy novels with lots of going on, right? And I also love Point Omega. And then, you know, I kind of like make this in musical terms, right? One of my favorite genres of music is the blues.
Yeah.
And it's just so simple.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just there's nothing to it. And not to say it's easy to do, because that's not my point at all. But there's nothing to it. It's very simple musically. The lyrics are very simple. And yet you've got these masters who's just like, they can just punch you in the heart. You know, when you listen to this stuff, sometimes it just hits you so on such a deep level. And so some people can kind of just immediately go to that simplicity and make it work. I think for somebody like DeLillo and maybe like these composers, I don't know as much about them, you know, personal lives and their trajectories and that kind of thing. I think for a certain kind of cerebral creator, what they might have to do is they might have to not only prove it to other people, but go through the exercise of doing all of it so they can find their way to that simplicity, right? Like, you can't, that first step, Don DeLillo couldn't play a perfect blues chord. He had to make, you know, the symphony of in Underworld, and then after that, he's like, oh, you know what? I'm really good at making this sound.
Yeah.
Bing.
I think
right. And sort of a learning experience for him too.
The other analogy, I'll try one more musical analogy. I love it. Like, I think it's amazing.
Right.
Like Hans Zimmer. He did like Gladiator, he did Dark Knight, he also did Dune, and like there's some of his scores where, like, I think Gladiator's quite this grand like thing, there's a lot going on, and then like Dune, it's actually stripped back a lot and it's a lot more atmospheric, but still he's not just filling in sound, it's like every part of that soundscape matters, or that score matters. And yeah, it's really masterful to see an artist figure that out within their particular their particular craft, in this case writing. I'm always jealous of them, like the fact that they can they can do that. Sorry, yeah,
right. Yeah, no, I see, like, it's interesting too, like, and I see, like, Hemingway is kind of in literature, right? Is thought of as this writer who's able to just like do as much with as little as possible, and I see a lot of writers trying to emulate that thing, and I think what they sort of miss out on is that it works for Hemingway because there's so much richness to every word. I think a lot of people can interpret that in a somewhat amateurish fashion, which is just like, well, just don't say too much. And it's like, no. Like, the game is say as much as you possibly can with as few words as you can. It's not don't say anything, right? and so, you know, Point Omega, this novel, he's sort of like this very peculiar, idiosyncratic meditation on time somehow. And it's sort of, it makes up a page-wise, or, you know, page space-wise, makes up a very small proportion of what's going on in an already very small book. And so, I think an editor now, if Don DeLillo, nobody'd ever heard of him, and he brought this book to an editor now, they would try to cut out all of like the cerebral philosophizing, and then you'd realize there's not even a book here.
It's except maybe with the exception of like some people like Hemingway, who, I don't know, like I don't know if it was Hemingway or if it was somebody else. Jack would be able to remind me who like one-shotted like a classic. Like, was it Hemingway or was it one of the other writers that
Hemingway Hemingway
There are
might
a
have.
few.
Faulkner, like apparently one shot
Did
it.
that. Like I think it was As I Lay Dying. He wrote in 2
like-
weeks or
Yeah, he
something.
would just get like wasted and turn
I think
over
he
a
was
wheelbarrow
he was a
and
coal
like
miner at the time. Yeah.
But with the exception of maybe people like that, I guess you could say like the rest of their career was when they were doing all of the editing potentially. But like most people, in order to like get the 100-page book, there's like 1,000 pages of stuff not included in it, you know, if it was going to be good. The amateurs like not seeing that, or the words written but not ever published. And yeah, for sure that comes through in that. Have you tried to do that in your own writing, like put it in the crucible of like less?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yes, I have. It's interesting because I have a not a ornate style, but I think I've developed a sort of idiosyncratic style, and it's much. I go for more detail than DeLillo does in this book, right? But it is always in editing. It's always okay. Well, how can I get away with that with less? How can I do less and say the same thing? And I'm working the final draft of my novel now, and everything's gone. Every chapter's gone through somewhere between 6 and 20 drafts at this point, right? And now, as I'm going through, I'm cleaning up a few things, and I got a couple details I got to change. I got to make sure some things line up. But mostly, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to cut another 5% out of it. Just like, okay, what happens if I, for every 20 pages, I get rid of one? What is this? How do I make? And nothing ends up getting lost. And it's very interesting when you try to like drain it out, and you end up making very specific and sometimes agonizing choices on like the phrase level. It's sort of like, I could get one word out of here if I completely restructure the sentence. Right?
Yeah, it's working out what is load bearing and what's not.
Yeah, no,
like which walls you can knock out.
It's
It's
totally
that
a
was
factor,
a capstone.
right?
Damn. Collapses.
Yeah. Well,
Just collapse
this
the
thing
house.
doesn't make any sense. And I do kind of subscribe to the thing, and maybe the sentence is too fine of a resolution, but I definitely subscribe to this thing. Like, if you can take it out and the whole thing still stands, it shouldn't have really been there to begin with, probably.
Yeah.
But I'm also, it's a tricky position that I'm always trying to navigate. I'm also not like when one of those reviews said this Point Omega, they were talking in laudatory terms about its lean prose. That lean prose isn't a draw.
It's a startup menu or something. Like, is it a minimum viable novel?
Right. Am I trying to Am I trying to read this as quickly as I can?
Yeah,
I want to make sure it's not wasting my time. Like, it's not. To me, it's not about. I'm
not the point.
in love with the poetry of it.
Yeah.
I want it to. I think part of what we're doing in writing, if you're trying to make a movie, just make a movie. A book is something different, and for me, part of that difference is the poetic potentiality of things. Right? Can we say something in a way that nobody really has maybe said it before, and can it sound a way that can you get the syntax and the sort of psychological impact of individual words? Can you make them sing in a way you haven't seen before? So lean to me is like, could be great, maybe it's not.
There's this
Just
beautiful.
get rid of all the adjectives.
One of my other favorite books, The Beginning of Infinity, also by David Deutsch. He's got this chapter at the end of it where it's exploring like epistemology, and it's like, okay, well, what makes good explanation? Good explanation is hard to vary, and we make it hard to vary by like creatively coming up with conjectures and then criticizing it and like finding problems, and so like our best explanations are actually really hard to vary because they're plugged into basically a whole bunch of problems that they're solving, and you can't just arbitrarily change it without it being unable to solve those problems anymore. So, and he finds these correspondences between, well, that also, when you look at like the way that Einstein was working, all the paper in the bin, that also applies to like Mozart. And there's all this like, it might not have been paper in the bin, but the iterations in his mind. And there's this sense of like, if you change one note in like a symphony of Mozart, becomes less beautiful than it would have otherwise been. And so there's this sense of like it being hard to vary as well. And I find that with like coding, like computer programming, there's a sense of like I can feel like there's so much more that I could do to like improve this program, to improve like it at a very like concrete, just functional level, but also on a level of like potentially things like elegance and stuff. You speak to like some programs and stuff that talk about like, I don't know how to express it, but there's almost like there's an aesthetic quality to certain code that like it's a pleasure to read and to have written it, and like there's a completeness to it, and that only comes through like modifying it, like deleting it, and then trying again. Like, I think that's you don't get to that quote unquote leanness without like that, like and
right, a lot of stuff you've cut out and polished down and sanded edges off of things. Yeah, no, I like that you said the word elegance. I mean, and it depends on like what I'm working on. I have some sort of keywords that I'm trying to keep in my head stylistically, and like the thing I'm working on now, elegant. I want to make it heavy and elegant at the same time. So it is sort of, to me, there is like this kind. Can you do that? I think I did it a couple times in this book, right? But it's an interesting contradiction. Like, how do you make this thing so it thunks, but it's also elegant somehow?
Like a nice
those kinds of challenges
sword.
Are fun. Yeah, right. That's perfectly made, right? Yeah, and you can swing it. Yeah,
like a European medieval broadsword is elegant in the same way a katana is elegant, but like it's got that. Yeah. Bam. I don't know. Maybe I'm
right. It's kind of, no, you're right. It's got like a concussive force to it, right?
Sure. Yeah. So I've got 2 more questions for you. I know you've got to jump off soon, but maybe I'll like let Jack jump in as well before I ask my final concluding questions.
Yeah. Okay.
No, go for it. I'm tired at the point where there have been a few times in recording this where I felt like I was listening to a podcast and then realized, oh shit, I'm actually recording.
That has happened. That has happened to me too. The other thing that tends to happen is when now, because I'm so used to doing our show, and I go on occasionally. I have to catch myself from like taking it over, I guess. And that comes from my anxiety about like, I'm making a show.
Taking it over
makes that job easy. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
Like, we want you guys on so we can hear you talk.
Yeah.
Well, because we thought our listeners would find like your work interesting.
Any other episode
like, that's
of ours.
Well, I hope they do. Yeah. These are always cool because hopefully some of our people listen to you guys now, and hopefully some of your people listen to us. This is how it all works in the indie media world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We Jack recently interviewed James. His YouTube channels or his Substack's Hermitics with an X. He's great.
Yeah, we've had James Ellis on.
Ellis,
yeah, he's great. I love that.
He's great. So, I downloaded a couple of his things, and he's just it's so interesting. Exiting modernity, like reading that. So yeah, he's an interesting guy. But yeah, like the purpose of like getting you guys, because we think that our audience would like find either your work directly interesting or the podcast interesting. So it's great. Like absolutely, like talk away. They listen to way too much of me and Jack talking So my second last question is we've spoken a lot about reading and I guess being a consumer or an appreciator of the art, and a little bit about the writing stuff. We do have some writers or aspiring writers or people who just like to write casually to express themselves or explore ideas and stuff in our audience. And obviously some component of us is like a surrogate like for actually reading the things, which is cool. But I also think like there's some subset of our audience who are like also writers, and I think that's really cool. So as a writer, do you have any I guess, how would I put this question? Like, where you're at, where you've gone to in your creative journey, whether it's like the writing itself or whether it's building like a career around that and the podcasting. Are there any like stories or lessons that you've picked up along the way that you could share with like, especially people who are interested in like writing as part of?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things I could say. I'm always a little leery about like. I used to do on Twitter, like writing tips or something, and it's like, what do I know? But there are things about the practice of it as like an actual thing you sit down and do. One thing is, and if you're just, it depends on what your goals are, right? But like, let's say you want to write and you'd like to get those things, at least some people reading it. you have to actually do it basically every day a little bit. There is inertia and momentum. There are, and I'm in this phase now, it's very, like, I'm more productive. Inspiration, I don't even really know what that is. I just know that the more I show up, the more happens. Last 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine is getting married, so we had a bachelor party, and it was kind of a weekend-long thing. And so I took like 3 days off. And it takes me like a week to get back sort of in the groove of doing it, right? And I know that, like, oh man, I got something coming up in July. That's going to throw me off by just the fact that I'm not coming to the desk every day for a couple of days. So that'd be one thing, is like, you do really need to be sort of consistent. It's like I don't want to make this analogy too strong, but it is sort of like exercise. Like, if you just exercise once a month, that literally doesn't matter. In terms of like your goal. Like, let's say you're trying to lose weight or get in shape, or, you know, get the beach body or whatever. Once a month is you might as well not even do it, in a sense, right? So you got to kind of be getting at it every day. A little bit is better than nothing. And part of that is also, like, I do have some sorts of woo-woo beliefs about what's happening in the creative process.
Nice. Yeah.
And I think
What is it?
Those are important.
well, there's a couple of things that kind of come along with this. I do think that the concept of the muse, like in the ancient sense, I do think that there is some truth to that. I do think that you actually, in the best parts of the creative process, are actually some form of channeling something. And I do think that there are means of opening yourself up to that and closing yourself off to that. And a lot of that actually has to do with boring stuff like routine, like doing things at the same time. It can even feel like superstition at times. Just having sort of familiar environments around you. And literally... And here is like the other part that kind of comes along with that. There's a great comic illustrator on the internet. People might know him, Owen Cyclops. And he says somewhere in a tweet or something, he says, the creative process is basically just allowing yourself to get so bored that you begin to hallucinate. And I really think there's something to that. I think there is something, like, one of the kind of crusty layers that's difficult for people to get through is there are times where it's super boring, and you just you have to find a way to, like, sort of stay in the room and get through that period. And I think for a lot of people, that's what kind of knocks them off. Is it's sort of like I'm doing something because it's kind of fun, and then wait, it's not fun 100% of the time. What the hell? Why am I doing this? Right? So you kind of got to get through. You got to kind of break through that cross. And then another thing, figure out some way to enjoy the editing process and the writing process. You have to. Because if you hate it, if you dread going back and redlining your stuff, it's going to be very difficult to get out the thing that's in your head onto the page in a way anywhere resembling what you want it to be. So that's also pick. If you live in a house with other people, you're not like, solo. Decide whether you're going to get up earlier than everybody or stay up later than everybody. You pretty much got to do one of those.
That's a really
or the
good
other.
point, actually.
Yeah, and it can be either one. It probably can't be both unless you're some kind of superhuman. But I kind of realized that for me, it was waking up earlier than everybody. It was one or the other. Otherwise, there was no way that time was going to exist for me to do what I need to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super true. I like the way that is it Hartfield puts it, the war of art, I think. Is that Pressfield?
Yeah.
Pressfield, like he calls it like turning pro.
Yeah.
And the pro is it doesn't matter about whether you're getting paid or not. You might not be getting paid yet to do whatever it is, writing or coding or art or whatever, but you turn pro the moment that you start showing up, even when you don't. feel like it's no longer like a hobbyist only does it when they feel like it and it's fun and they're inspired.
Right.
And it's like a
Right.
pro is like at their thing, whether or not they feel like it.
That concept was super
Yeah.
influential to me, and I'm even thinking that in terms of the podcast.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just sit back and like, what should we be doing? And the question I ask myself is like, well, okay, what would I do if if this was like an actual enterprise that paid all of my bills? What would we do? Oh, well, we would make a trailer for that. Okay, let's make a trailer. You know, it's like you just, and luckily we have a lot of the tools available to us, right? House of Sleep, I mean, I did everything from the typesetting to the cover design to everything for that book. And yeah, I mean, I like how it looks, and other people have said they like how it looks. And, you know, my point with that was like, well, nobody wanted to publish it. I was like, well, what would a publisher do with it if they were going to publish it? I'll just do that. I'll figure out how to do it. I'll learn how to use Photoshop and, you know, spend some hours figuring out what are the elements of a cool cover, and, you know, I'll just make it happen. And, you know, hopefully at some point you can have some other people helping you with that stuff. But yeah, sometimes you just have to decide, like, I'm just going to do this the way that I would do it if it was as successful as I wanted to be.
Yeah. Well, you got to practice, right? So there you go.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, okay. So my last question then is just basic stuff, like where can our listeners go to find out more about? You guys mentioned it a bunch of times, but like put all in one spot at the end. Like where would you say go to first, and then what are some other like things that they could go to after?
Yeah, the website for the podcast is artofdarkpod.com, and it's basically Art of Dark Pod is the sort of handle for everything. You'll find all the podcast episodes, and we put links to guest spots that we do and other things that we're working on there as well. So artofdarkpod.com. We're really active on Twitter at Art of Dark Pod. My personal is Brad Kelly. At Brad Kelly on Twitter. I'm fairly active on there. And then Kevin and I both have our own personal websites.
Yeah.
I think Kevin's is Kautzmania. Mine is Brad Kelly-esque. That's ESQUE. And you can find, like I said, the first third of House of Sleep is available for free. You can listen to it basically like a podcast as audio, and it's got a soundtrack even kind of. Also, I have some short stories there that people might be interested in. I have a in-process writing project on the tarot, which is sort of my tertiary obsession. That's all there. But yeah, check out Art of Darkness. I mean, most recent episode, Sylvia Plath. We're going to be talking about tackling the Shakespeare authorship question here soon. We have an episode that will be, I promise, will be the most in-depth piece of audio content on Cormac McCarthy on the internet. That will be out later this summer. So people should look out for that.
Fantastic. Well, we hope that everybody listening, that you enjoyed our guests. Go and check out their stuff. We should let you go, hey? Like you said, 20 minutes left, 40 minutes ago.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. This is great. I'm really enjoying this. There's just, basic biological functions that I need to attend to. Well, this is
if you're open to it, like whether it's some of Kevin's stuff or whether it's like House of Sleep, let us know. Like maybe we can like schedule it or something. That'd be really interesting.
Okay. Yeah. We'll talk back channel. That sounds great.